So welcome everybody to our Storyteller Coffeehouse for April. I am Dr. Deborah Fripp, the Executive Director of Teach the Shoah. And tonight we have the honor of getting to listen to one of our wonderful storytellers and actually one of our Teach the Shoah board members, Tanya Wisoker. Tanya, would you say hello?
Hello, hello. Hi there.
Thank you, Tanya. So I'm very excited to be able to bring her to you. Before that, though, I want to introduce Teach the Shoah to everybody. So for those of you who don't know Teach the Shoah, we are a global internet-based organization dedicated to bringing the stories of the Holocaust through testimony-based storytelling to as many people as we possibly can. And tonight's program is part of that. We have a lot of other kinds of programs that we do, and I invite you to come to our website, teachtheshoah.org, and see what we do and stay in contact with us if you have interest in any of the other kinds of things that we do. We have a couple of upcoming programs after this. Yom HaShoah is coming up in the beginning of May, and we have 3 programs we're going to do for Yom HaShoah. Our yearly Light from the Darkness ritual. This is a commemoration ceremony written by myself and my co-founder, Violet Neff Helms, who I believe is here. Violet, say hi. Violet, are you here? I thought Violet was here.
She's here, but I don't know if she can get off mute now.
Anyway, Violet is here, and my co-founder and another one of our board members. So we're going to be running that on Erev Yom HaShoah, which is Sunday, May 5th at 8 p.m. In Eastern in the U.S. We are also having one of our Sharing Their Stories story-infused lectures run by our Director of Holocaust Scholarship, Lynn Feldman in Israel. This year's theme for Yom HaShoah is going to be partisan stories. And we're actually holding 2 versions of this, one at 8 p.m. Eastern time for the US on May 2nd, and one at 1 p.m. Eastern time, which is 8 p.m. Jerusalem on May 9th for the Israeli audience, but the Americans are obviously welcome to come too. So if 1 p.m. on a Thursday is better for you, then please come to that. Those 2 programs will be the same. I also want to tell you that we are running our first ever annual appeal. It is our one and only fundraising appeal that we do during the year. So the appeal is called Lisette, meaning to bear, because it is our job not only to take this torch from the survivors, but actually to carry it. And in order to do that, we need financial support as well as emotional support that all of you always give us. So if you are so motivated, please come and donate at teachtheshoah.org/Lisette. So we appreciate anything that you can give. So let me tell you what we're going to do tonight. We're going to, in a moment, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer, our storytelling director. And she's going to start us off with some guided imagery to bring us into the space. And then we're going to listen to Tanya tell her story, after which we will appreciate her story and notice what happens inside of us as we listen to her story. After which we will hear from her about her process, and we'll have a little Q&A. The official program will end at 9 o'clock, but after that, we will have a half-hour workshop. If you want to experience what it's like to start to learn how to do this kind of storytelling, or if you have done it before and you just want to play and come and do some more, because it's always fun, in a sense, to be able to work on telling these stories, please join us for that optional workshop. We'll be exploring it, storytelling using a prompt that we give you, so you don't need to have anything prepared. So Jennifer, I'm going to stop the share here and turn it over to Jennifer. Jennifer, why don't you start us out with some guided imagery?
Sure. Thanks, Deborah. Okay, everyone. So to get us in the mood to hear this story and in this space, we invite you to go inward. You can turn off your video if you would like. It's not necessary, but a lot of people like to do that. I'm going to close my eyes, and you could do that as well. So, and know that anything I say is simply an invitation. If you want to go into your mind and turn the volume down and do what you need to do, that is fine as well. So the invitation is to take a deep breath. And you're on mute, so you can let out a nice sigh along with me if you'd like. And feel your breath go deeply down, not only into your lungs, but way, way down. We like to say into your kishkas, into your guts, your intestines. So you're really filling yourself up with this gift of breath, of ruach, this gift that we get every moment of every day, but usually we don't remember to think of it as a gift. And allow this breath to help settle you. So you're in this lower place, not only in your head, but down deep. You can even feel the breath all the way to your toes. And notice whatever you're coming in with, perhaps from a busy day, and see if you can just let that slide off your shoulders. It may help to let your shoulders drop, for they creep toward our ears during the day. So let those shoulders drop. Feel your spine realign. Feel your head just a little bit float upward, and your feet nice and solid on the floor, and your tushies, your bottoms, nice and comfy on your chair. And prepare yourself to listen. We know you're all listeners. That's why you came. And so just bring that deep listener deeply into yourself. And with the next breath, we will prepare ourselves to come back into our co-created space. Thank you for making it a warm space with us. When you're ready, no rush. You can open your eyes and turn back on your cameras. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for being here. Okay, so Deborah, we can put back up our slides. Okay, so we want to remind you, we know you know that you're at a Holocaust storytelling event, but these are Holocaust stories, so parts will be intense and it will hit each of us differently. So take care of yourself. If you want to go off camera, if you want to get some water, get some air, you take care of you. And we will be here telling these stories when you're ready to be back with us. So we can go to our next slide. So now I get to introduce more formally Tanya Wisoker, who has been one of our most regular tellers and really such a gift to our community. Tanya is a Jewish educator, a playwright, and a Jewish storyteller. She lives in Tidewater, Virginia. She's a licensed teacher and has taught in secular schools and Jewish day schools. And in 2020, Tanya earned her certificate as a RISE Storyteller Educator as part of the New Cage Jewish Educator Conference. And since 2021, Teach the Show has been so fortunate to have Tanya perform stories based on the testimonies of those who experienced the Holocaust. And she has told many different stories here in our community. Tanya enjoys creative nature photography, poetry, and she is often working to increase the appreciation and awe of the natural world. We are so pleased that she is here and has taken this story into her heart. So now we're going to hear about the person the story's about. So Bill, or his full name, William John Jucksch is how it's pronounced. William John Jucksch was born in 1925 in McAllen, Texas. He served with distinction in World War II as part of Patton's Third Army. Bill was awarded 2 battle stars and the French Croix de Guerre and was named Knight of the Legion of Honor by the French president. After the war, he helped wire audio devices at the Nuremberg trial, so every witness, as well as listeners all around the world, could listen to the translation of the testimonies. Bill had a very successful Navy career, and at the end of his career, he ended up receiving the Navy Superior Civilian Service Award. He began telling the story of what he witnessed as an American non-Jewish soldier. He witnessed in Nazi Europe when he was 84. He began to tell the stories of what he had seen all those years ago. Bill Jucksch passed away in 2017 in Norfolk, Virginia. So now we will take down the slides and get ourselves ready to listen. If you need to write anything in the chat for any reason, please write privately to Deborah or myself and not using the everyone feature so that people aren't distracted by words across all of our screens. And one last little intro, and then Tanya will get started. Tanya is going to tell the story of William John Jucksch, who was an American radio operator in Europe during World War II. And Tanya will tell Bill's story in the first person. Thank you, Tanya.
Maybe you'll read my obituary someday. And I think you'll find that those black and white words on the paper, they might tell the facts of a man's life, but they can't really convey all of his story. They can't really tell you history. I'm Bill, William John Jucksch. I was born in McAllen, Texas in December 1925. I had what I think was a pretty typical childhood for a Depression time. My parents split up when I was only a couple of years old. My mother remarried, and that didn't work out either. I lived in Chicago, Cleveland, Jackson Heights, Manhattan, but really, my home all the years I was growing up, most of all, was in Neosho in Missouri on my grandparents' farm. I guess I was your typical blue-eyed country boy. I lettered in track in high school and in football, of course, and I worked on the farm. After my grandfather passed away, it was just my grandmother and me, and we made it work. In fact, the Depression started lightening up, and my grandmother started talking about buying a couple more cows and seeing about getting me a 6-month farmer's exemption to keep me out of the war. Well, I turned 18 at the end of 1943. All through high school, we'd been watching those newsreels. We knew what was going on in Nazi Europe. The Germans going through country after country, the atrocities, we were reading about it in the newspapers. We knew what they were doing to the Jewish people there and to so many others. So I signed up. I knew I had to go. I didn't even finish my senior year of high school. And in the summer of 1944, I was on a boat on my way to France as a our field artillery radio operator. Well, the next year was intense. I was part of the 71st Division, Patton's Third Army, and we just pushed those Germans all the way down through France, through Germany, headed off to Austria, pushing them forward. I saw a lot of battles. I was in a lot of battles, and I saw a lot of men go down, good men, friends of mine. In the spring, as we were moving along, hunting for the Germans, I was doing forward reconnaissance. So what that means, if you're an athlete like I was, is that the Army straps a 60-pound radio on your back, you jump in the Jeep, and you go out ahead of the battle lines. Our job is to scout out the Germans. It's scary work, but you're soldiers and you do it. Maybe you travel at night with the lights off. And on one morning, and I remember the date, it was May 4th, 1945. My captain wants us to go check out a couple of hills that he sees, like just basically circles on the map. And we found a road, not a paved road, nothing like that, just a dirt, rutted mud road, maybe big enough for one, maybe two Jeeps. And we started driving into the woods on this road. And then it hit us, a smell, a terrible, terrible smell, a stench so dreadful that I've never forgotten it, even to this day. And I can guarantee you that anybody who experienced that smell can still talk to you about it if they dared to speak about it. We drove forward about maybe 200 yards, and then we saw it. We knew what it was right away. It was one of those Nazi prison camps. Barbed wire going all around. There were some buildings that were half hidden under the trees. Couple of Nazis standing at the gate, already in surrender. We figured they must have known we were coming. They stepped aside, not sure where they went, and the four of us walked in. You have to imagine the mud here. It was stinking ankle-deep mud filling this entire compound. And as we stepped forward, we saw that in that mud were people. Now you can imagine that some of those people were walking towards us or trying to walk towards us as best as they could. But you might not have realized that many of the people were not walking towards us, but were crawling through this stick-feeted mud, crawling towards us and wrapping their arms around our lower legs and reaching up to us, hugging us, even kissing our filthy, dirty boots. And I know you're not imagining what I saw. People lying there in that mud who were not yet dead, who could not walk, could not rise themselves up out of that mud, but their eyes were tracking us. You could see a tear on this emaciated face, maybe raised an arm up towards us. And I know you don't imagine the number of bodies, the people who had died in that mud, emaciated bodies, just skin and bones, people who had literally starved to death right there in the mud. So this was Gunskirchen Lager, Lager being a prison camp, and this was at the town of Gunskirchen. And as we learned later, it was a subcamp of Mauthausen, which was one of the more horrific slave labor camps, maybe 30, 40 miles to the east of us, towards Linz in Austria. There were people who could speak English in this camp. There was probably 400 intellectuals, political prisoners who were in here, along with 15,000, 16,000 other people who were still hanging on to life. And they told us what had happened here in the days and weeks and months before. The Germans, the guards, had just left maybe 3-4 days ago because they knew the Americans were coming. When they left, they left. They left the 2 guards at the front and not a smidgen of food for these 15, 20, however many there were before we got there, 1,000 people in this camp who had already been on starvation rations. Some of the Jews in this camp had just arrived only days prior, a 5-day march from Mauthausen, because the Germans were trying to empty out proof of what they had done before the soldiers from the Allied troops arrived there. There were Hungarian Jews in this camp who, over the last 6-7 months, had walked almost the entire way from Hungary, all the way through the mountain passes of Austria. Of course, these were the survivors of that death march. We went to check out the building, one of these barracks. This was a hastily built, shoddily built kind of a structure that when you looked at it, you guessed could maybe hold 300 prisoners. And when we pushed the door open, what we saw in this one building was close to 3,000 people. So you saw human beings in every state of close to death and death that you could imagine. So people who were trying to crawl out, who hadn't been able to walk out like those more fortunate people that we had already seen in the prison yard, were trying to make their way over people who were almost at death's door, who couldn't move. And even maybe too deep under that were people who had passed away in the last week, and there was nobody there to bury them, and they just stayed there. And under all of it was that stinking mud, a mud of feces and urine. It was dreadful. And hearing the cries, these weak cries for Wasser, Wasser, water. They'd had no water, no food for days. Whew. So we made our way back out into the yard. We radioed for help and noticed another thing that I know you are not imagining. A dead horse, the carcass of a horse that had been killed likely in shelling 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, who knows? And it had pieces of it cut away. This was a rotting, puffed up carcass of a horse, and there was a man there on his knees, picking and pulling and biting at this meat to have some sort of meat. For us, standing there with these people looking at us with totally sunken faces, grown men, maybe 60 pounds, 70 pounds, open sores, they smelled, it was awful. And all they wanted was just to be let out of this hellhole. My buddy Pete helped one of these men to his feet and was trying to feed him. And this man died in Pete's arms. I can tell you that memory torments Pete to this day, all these years later. The medics arrived. The 71st was well equipped and ready with food, with stretchers to help as many of these people get what they needed. many of them died just in the arms of their rescuers. The 761st, the Black Panthers, were there within minutes. That's the African American Tank Battalion that was traveling with us at the time. And as I headed back to the Jeep, I saw what had happened to one of those guards. The other man, I think he slunk away. But this man, the prisoners had surrounded, had knocked him down, and had beat him with whatever they had, a fist, a shoe, a brick. These were desperate, starving men. And when I say they beat him, I don't just mean they killed him. I mean they beat him to a pulp in the mud. I was only at Gunskirchen for maybe 45 minutes, less than an hour. I know that we managed to rescue 18,000, 15,000 people, but double that number had died in the time before we arrived there. We had to leave. Our job was to go hunt the Germans. And the war was over. VE Day was announced only a couple days later. That was the end of it. But in that moment, I knew what we were fighting for. That's what got me back in that Jeep. I understood what we were fighting for. When I was back in the States, I didn't talk about this. Soldiers don't do that. I held it in. Why would I want to relive that horror? Until I was 84 years old, 2009, and I understood that there were people saying, oh, the Holocaust, what happened there in Europe, it wasn't really that bad. It's a hoax, it's a story, didn't really happen, it was an exaggeration. Those people should be locked away in an insane asylum. They are crazy. There's way, way too much proof. I saw it, we saw it. And now I will tell my story. I'll tell my story to church groups, to Jewish groups, to Muslim groups. I will tell my story to schools and moose lodges and elk lodges, to anybody who will have me. Because my message is very simple. We saw what happened. We know now how it happened and what started it and how we got there. But we have to keep telling the story, or it will not be remembered and it will not be taken seriously. Sinclair Lewis wrote a book, It Can't Happen Here. Oh, he was wrong. It can happen again and it can happen here. I'm going to keep telling this story. And now I hope you will too.
Thank you, Tanya. Let's take a deep breath and let's take about a minute. I think we need it to take in and breathe in and out. So why don't we do that together? One big breath, all of us together, including Tanya. Really deserves that breath. Thank you so much, Tanya. Thank you for everyone for holding the space of a very, very difficult story. So here's the part where we give appreciations to our storytellers. So Tanya, may I give you appreciations? And we're going to have the opportunity, everybody has the opportunity now to write in the chat any appreciations for Tanya. And then we will open the space up in a moment after I give some to let people continue to write in the chat or to raise your physical hand or the little yellow reaction hand. And we'll have time to call on several people to give some positive feedback. So Tanya, whew, thank you so much. This is a story that is, even among our stories, an incredibly difficult one, incredibly challenging to just be present to. And of course, you had to be present to it first. Well, Bill had to be present to it first. And then you had to be present to him being present and to articulate that in a way that honored him. And I don't see how you possibly could have honored him any more than you had, and the people that he saw. You took so much time in between each thing that you said so that we could in some small way let it in. We needed every moment that you gave us. I think you needed every moment, and I appreciated the crafting in the storytelling sense that you knew what you were saying was so powerful, and that you knew you needed the time. And I felt that Bill's presence was absolute with us, and his passion and anger and hope that we would really take seriously his words. And he couldn't hope for a more really beautiful vessel for a terrible, terrible story. I'll just point out a few things. Just his choice to go. Here he's the 17-year-old kid seeing the reels in the TV, in the movie theater, and knowing that he has to be part of that. Of course, having no clue, absolutely no clue what he's getting himself into. And here he is, this athlete, everything going for him in this prime of shape. And because of that, he's picked to go as one of the select few ahead of his group regiment. And so he's seeing some of these horrors first. And the way you talked about each of the people and the different conditions they were in, and this bizarre situation of being a hero out of nowhere, suddenly just being there. And I could feel it from him. I could feel it from them. You gave me time to be with both Bill and the people that he was trying to help. There was a line you had about the people who couldn't even move, who were laying in the yard, and their eyes were tracking him and the other soldiers. Oh my gosh, I could just feel the truth of that so much. But that's all they had left. And the eyes were desperate, and the eyes were thanking them. And the way you brought in so much history, when this could be a story that just flooded by the intensity, which of course it was, but telling us about the people and where they had come from, and the intellectuals, and how some of the people had just come from another march. So it wasn't just these bodies. We got the sense of their humanity, and all the regions of Europe they had come from, and the different things they had experienced up until that point. The thing I'm looking at some notes that I wrote, and I wrote, you didn't flinch, you refused to look away. And that's what's really staying with me with this story. You took a breath, you honored it, you were not okay with any of it, but you still didn't look away. And that combination of the pain Bill was feeling, you were feeling, and the ability to still look that hell like right in the eye, that was just incredibly powerful, and technically and emotionally extremely challenging. I'm so glad it is you who's telling this story. Thank you, Tanya.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Oh, you're welcome. So we're going to open up. Do you want to say anything briefly, Tanya, before I open up to appreciations? Because you just may need to just share a little something first if you want.
No, and I'm reading
You're
these.
reading the chats. Okay, so then
I'm hearing your emotions and then reading these, and I can feel from you the emotion that is coming from
Yeah.
the story.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you for doing this. Whew. So we're going to now open the space. Even if you wrote in the chat, it's okay. You can share. We'll ask each person to share, 30 seconds, 45 seconds, just so that we have time to get a lot of you if you want to share. And just a reminder, the word appreciation, I know sounds very odd after hearing a story like this. Nobody appreciates much about the content of this story, right? And what he went through. But we all appreciate that we know it, or most of us do. And we appreciate what Tanya did. So that's what I mean about appreciations, is what do you appreciate about the story, about how it was told, about your experience as a learner, as you were taking in the story. So you can raise your hand or use the yellow hand if you'd like. Violet.
Tanya, thank you. Your calmness made this story feel like it had such reality to us right now. The way you built the story up using Bill's words, we learned where he came from, and it built who he was. And it was remarkable. And I appreciate what you've done. Thank you.
Thank you, Violet. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I see Mitch.
Oh, Tanya, wow. My mentor always said, when you appreciate someone, their feeling of themselves and what they do appreciates. And I think of that every time I'm with Jennifer. I have to appreciate everything you just did and really reflect what we just heard from Violet. This was such an emotional and difficult story, and yet you held that at bay enough to tell the story. And I felt like that's what Bill would have had to have done if he ever expressed the story as well. And that made the story even deeper. And the smells and everything was so real. But your countenance and your contemplation and your pacing just drew me in. Thank you. Beautiful.
Thank you, Mitch.
Thanks, Mitch.
I think we're just going to take a breath after each appreciation. You can feel the weight, right? The honoring of each of you and the weight of what you're carrying as we now co-carry this burden with Tanya. Stephanie, and then Susan, and then Jill.
Wow, Tanya. I also want to thank you for telling this incredibly difficult story. The words that you chose and the pacing that you told the story, as horrific as the pictures were, you painted such a picture. I was shuddering at times throughout your story. And there are images that I don't think I will ever lose from your telling. You did an amazing job with such an intense, horrific story. So thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
So, Susan, sorry, Tanya. Tanya's, thank you for your thanks. Susan, you're next.
Tanya, your story just hit me so hard. My father was the exact same age, and he was also in Patton's army. And the way you brought us into the story, just talking about this young man who had been a football player and on the track team and had all his life, and then to end up fighting in a war, and at the last bit of the war to walk into a concentration camp. And just the images of that mud, as I think Stephanie wrote, she'll never think about mud the same way, with dead people and dying people and crawling people all on top of each other. It was very powerful. And yet the way that you tell a story is so gentle and so, you unfold it so beautifully. And I get too emotional, but you just, I just loved it. I didn't like the topic. I mean, I didn't, but the story was told so well. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan.
Ooh, yes. I mean, this is such care, such again, mastery of the craft of storytelling and the emotional capacity you have both to be present and to hold, to know where to pull in and where to hold away was just really something to behold. Jill.
Hi, I appreciate that, you know, the story was told from a perspective that, you know, wasn't us, you know, like, you know, and a lot of times, I mean, most of the stories is about a survivor, you know, or, you know, someone who died, and then we extrapolate, or maybe a survivor's you know, family, or someone who's died, their family. And, you know, this is kind of someone like outside, and it's like, and when you said, like, we knew what they were doing, and, you know, to the Jews, like, not just, you know, to the world wreaking havoc around the world, but, you know, specifically mentioning Jews, because a lot of times, you know, Jews aren't necessarily specifically mentioned. You know, most of the time we're unspecifically mentioned, like, it's sort of glossed over. So I really appreciated that. And you know, hearing it from someone and having them be as devastated as maybe, you know, we are what happened to our own people. So I appreciate that. You know,
Thanks.
sometimes you have
Jill,
to,
we're gonna have to in a second move on because I want to get Deborah and then we have to move on to the
Okay.
next part. Do you want
um,
to say one last sentence?
all right, so I'll just wrap up by saying, because you know, sometimes obviously, I mean, my priority is obviously the Holocaust and what it did to Jews, my people, but it also affected other people as well. And I've been watching a Netflix series called Jaguar, and
Jill,
about
I'm sorry. I feel bad
Oh.
for cutting you up, but I have to move on because of a limited
Okay,
time.
I'm just saying, I
Thank
just
you.
appreciated the different perspective that we brought in today. You know,
Thank you.
but
Yes.
it just happened
Yes.
to the world too. And so
Yes.
we need to say
Yes.
that.
It's a Jewish story and a very humanity story. Thank you, Jill. Thank you for that insight. Deborah.
Well, primarily my raised hand means that we need to move on. But I actually, I want to say I appreciate Jill's comment, because one of the things that we try to put out into the world as an organization is that the Holocaust is a bigger story than just the Jews. And this is one of the places that you can see that, is the incredible impact it had on the people who witnessed it, who didn't experience it. So
Thank you, Deborah. Yeah.
Jennifer, let us move on to
Sure.
our
Yes,
next.
because we have a few pieces that we have to wrap up before 9. So we want right now to invite Tanya. Tanya, you can take 2 minutes or 3 minutes to tell us a little bit about your process of creating this story. Of course, this is based on testimony. You know, why did you choose this story? Anything you want to say about putting it together?
So I heard Bill Jucksch speak at a Holocaust Commission event a few years ago, probably more than a few years ago. Now that I think about it, probably 2016 or 2015. And it stuck with me then. And when I began working with Teach the Shoah, I knew that was a story that I wanted to use because of exactly what you all are saying. This was a man who was young, Midwestern, had his whole life ahead of him, and certainly had no real need to be a liberator for Jews suffering in a concentration camp. And this moment in his life, this hour, he talked about it and wrote about it. I've seen numerous interviews with him online. He's actually was featured in a movie called 6,000,001. That 45 minutes compared to the whole war, where he won all sorts of medals and citations of bravery and everything else, the thing that he took away more than anything else was man's humanity against man. And I think that's the important thing here. So I have his testimony in books. I've looked up different video testimonies for different organizations. I've read articles about Gunskirchen. There are the actual 71st Division, they created a book, a little pamphlet of what they witnessed there, and sent that out, publicized it after the war. It's not, it wasn't secret, it wasn't hidden. Americans knew what was happening. They might not have known to what extent. And let me say one other thing here. When we're talking about the idea that for a young man like Bill Jucksch, it was a surprise what he found there, and unbelievable, the horrible evil that he saw. But another viewpoint that I learned about when I was researching all of this was the African-American soldiers, such as the 761st Tank Battalion, that also were involved in rescuing and liberating Mauthausen. And when you listen to some of their testimony or read some of their stories, what will jump out at you is the men who say, I come from, Jim Crow South, and I know how Black people are treated, and I know about slavery, I've read about it, but what we saw there in these concentration camps was beyond anything one could even imagine for how to treat other human beings. So I would like you to also keep in mind that it was every American, or should I say every one of the Allied troops who walked into these camps and saw what they saw, who were shaken to the core.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you. As Deborah just wrote, the depth of your research that you do consistently for every story that you tell, and to have the research skill and the wherewithal to continue to read this material, and how that would affect you, and then to put it together into, using the art of storytelling is quite a set of gifts that is really needed, especially for a story like this. So thank you. Thank you. So we're going to turn this into a little bit of a Q&A. We don't have much time, but we can take a few questions and then Tanya can answer. So I think, Deborah, you're going to spotlight us, right?
And you can also show those pictures, or you want
Oh,
to wait?
yes, yes. Perfect.
I'm not showing any pictures, and there are plenty of them from the camp itself. And by the way, there were women and children at this camp as well. So this is a marker that they've, I guess I don't know who put it up, the German government put in honor of the 71st for their liberation of Gunskirchen Lager that is there now in this little town in Germany. The pamphlet on the left is the pamphlet that the 71st put out. You can find this online. You can actually read all the statements, and you'll probably wonder how it is that I managed to find the less gruesome things to tell you, because there's a lot more to it than that. And the top photo is Bill as a young man off to do heroic deeds. And then Bill as, I'm guessing in his probably mid-late 80s there, a little bit younger. The bottom is one of those is an Army chaplain. That was a reunion of the 71st. And the one fellow with him is one of the guys that was on the Jeep with him. I don't remember which one, Earl Flanagan, I think his name was.
Tanya, to think that he was that young,
Yeah.
that he
That's
was that young or almost that young when he saw those things. Oh my God.
That's where I was noticing too. He looks so baby faced, and I think about my own kids, and you know, he's younger than 2 out of 3 of my kids, which is just mind blowing.
And here, these are some of Tanya's many sources. You can't obviously click here, but if if somebody wants them, we could get them to you later. But
You'll be
you
able
can
to look up anything if you just type in Gunskirchen Lager.
Will
And
you
it's
put it in the chat?
exactly like it's spelled, guns and then Kirchen, like church, and Lager, Lager. I could write it in the chat.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I don't know if you want to look.
Right, what's up to people if they exactly.
The-
And we wouldn't recommend it tonight. This was enough of the imagery, right? So thank you, Tanya. So we're gonna go into yes, our Q&A mode. So who has a question for
So
Tanya?
if you have a question, either write it in the chat or raise your yellow hand, because with the 3 of us spotlighted, we can't necessarily see you raising your hand. And we'll pass it on from the chat or call on you when you're with the raised hand.
Please ask some questions.
And the question can be content-based, but can also just be about her process putting the story together or what it's like. I actually have a question for you. So while we're waiting for other people to raise their hand, what do you do, if anything, consciously to take care of yourself as you're actually telling, like during those, 15 minutes of telling, or in the minutes before? Anything you want to share about how you get into that space?
That's a great question. I think I almost have to be blank. When I start talking, I become that person, and I become the story, and it all just flows, and I can't stop to really think too hard about any given moment, because then I would completely be unable to finish the story. And at the end of it, it's just I just sitting and breathing for a moment. But you can't really, the only way you can prepare yourself, I think, is you've just told it, you've read it, you've thought about it, you've been it enough times that it's not as painful.
Thank you. Thank you.
There's a couple of questions in the chat, and Stephanie's and Violet's question kind of are, I'm going to ask them together. Stephanie wanted to know how you choose the images to use in your telling. And Violet was asking sort of the same question in a slightly different way. With all the information you were able to find, what was your MIT and how did you whittle it down to hit your MIT? For those of you who are not within our storytelling cadre, an MIT is the most important thing. That is the thing that she wanted us to get out of her telling. So often you have to take a large amount of information and sort of whittle it down in order to be able to focus on that. So how did you choose and how did you whittle it down from all the information you were finding?
Yeah. So, and what's interesting is I found so much more information. Even today, I was looking something up. My daughter asked me, "Are you sure that that he would have known as a young man what they were doing in Germany?" And I said, "Yes, I'm sure, but I'll look it up." And I did. So there's always something new that you'll find. So how do I pick what to tell? The reason I wanted to tell Bill Jucksch's story really had to do with the fact that he was a non-Jew who witnessed something horrible and identified and recognized that it was done purposely to Jewish people, which is really one of the Holocaust denial tactics, right? To say, well, it wasn't just the Jews, it was a bunch of other people too, and it was just kind of incidental. So for this man to tell about it from a point of view that doesn't come from a Jewish background, he did not have a story that had to do with his grandparents or his ancestors or his close friends or anything like that. He was talking about something that he witnessed that changed his life. And that's the one thing that he talks about out of all of his war experiences, even more so than talking about what he, did at Nuremberg. So my most important thing was how to convey the horror a non-Jewish person feels seeing this attempted destruction of an entire people. He talks about that too. And how did I choose which scenes? The first time I told this story, I left a lot of this stuff out of it because it wasn't an audience that was prepared in any way to hear any of that. I chose the scenes that would demonstrate the cruelty, the inhumanity, the desperation that the prisoners were feeling, and hoped that it wouldn't be too awful, but would allow you a little window into what the prisoners might have experienced, as well as what Bill and his buddy Pete and the captain and the other guy in the Jeep experienced at that moment. I hope that
Thank you.
answers the question.
One final question before we close out, because I think it's actually, in some ways, an important question. Judy wants to know how you sleep at night.
I work 2 part-time jobs, plus I do teach the show, and I am exhausted all the time. So I sleep and I read boring books like right now I'm rereading for the 3rd time The Handicap Principle, which is a wonderful biology book that you should all read. It'll
So
help you.
your the fullness of your life and the different kinds of things helps you balance out the intensity.
I do not think about these stories at night. Zero. Absolutely. I block anything like that is very much kept in a box in my head. It's not going to come to me during the days or during the night. I won't let it.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Tanya, and
Tanya.
thank you for an incredible program. And I will say, the idea of leaving it behind is an important part of doing these kind of programs. So in order to help you all to leave it behind, in a moment, Jennifer is going to give us a guided meditation to take us out of the space. However, I ask you to remember that we are going to continue for another half hour with a storytelling workshop. So if you are interested in trying this out, or if you've done it before and you would like to have a chance to work on it some more, please stay for the next half hour and stick around to work with us. So Jennifer, I'm going to unspotlight us and leave
Thanks.
it to you to
Sure.
lead us out of the space.
Okay, thank you. All right, everyone. So let's take a deep breath. You can go off camera again if you would like, and just get yourself settled. And I know some of you do have to go pretty close to the hour, but it is worth staying for this part as a way of taking care of yourself. So let's take a deep breath and let it out slowly. And again, with each breath, imagine your breath traveling through you and giving you some fresh air and a little bit of a cleanse from the inside. And so when you breathe that fresh air that is going into you to help you, to settle you, to know that even as these stories are important to remember, we don't need to carry the full burden of them with us every moment. And so that let the air break up those sticky places, those coagulated places. Imagine the intensity, the way things are maybe feeling trapped inside, that your breath, this holy breath, is just going right in and breaking this up to little pieces, manageable pieces, and the places, the pieces that you want to keep in, that feel important to you to know and to have, can go in a much easier way. And the parts that you need to let go of, go out with the out breath. Let's do that a few times. In with the in, breaking up anything that needs to be, cleansing anything that needs to be cleansed, and letting go of the pieces that you need to let go of. And as you're doing this breath a few more times, imagine yourself preparing for your evening, preparing for bed, and telling yourself, because we can really do this, I want to have good dreams tonight. This is what I want to be in my dreams. This is what I don't want. And then we can ask for what we need and let go of what we don't need so that we can settle into bed and be comforted. To know the stories are being carried on together. We do not have to hold them all. We do not have to take that with us each night. So let's do one more breath, and this time a big stretch. Shake out whatever you want to shake out. If you want to kind of reconnect to your body, give yourself a hug, give yourself some comfort, do that. When you're ready, come back into our space. Thank you, my friends, for making this space, holding this space so that we could hold this story together and that we do not need to hold it alone.